welcome to Series 10 In Suspense Special with the lovely Trevor Wood. And so because it's a special, there's no introduction, we're just straight in with Trevor.
We are indeed. Now, Trevor, you are our first ever returning guest, so welcome back.
I am so honoured.
We couldn't have thought of a better person, could we?
No.
I'm just trying to think of the 50 people who said they wouldn't come back.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes. And before we start, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Because a lot has happened since we last had you on the podcast. I think it was back in November 2021.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about you and your books?
Yeah, sure. My first book came out in 2020, The Man on the Street, practically on the day of lockdown. A bit like Nikki's first book as well.
Yeah.
It was a book that I developed when I did the UEA crime writing masters in Norwich, alongside various other wonderful writers like Harriet Tyson, Kate Simmons, and took a long time to get published after that. It was out on submission for a long time. Eventually got picked up on its second run of submissions, and got very little fanfare, but then suddenly started to pick up interest, and won a few awards and did quite well, which allowed me to write some more books, which is great. So I followed that up with two more books, which were all set in Newcastle's homeless community, with an ex-serviceman, homeless veteran, Jimmy Mullen, solving crimes that the police either weren't interested in or didn't really think were crimes in the first place. So I wrote three of those books, and then most recently have a standalone thriller called You Can Run, which is set in a remote Northumberland village. And I've just signed a new 2-book deal as well.
We'll talk about that later. That's
more
exciting.
of which later, I'm sure.
And you're too modest to say, I think, aren't you? But your first novel, The Man on the Street, won the CWA John Creasy New Blood Dagger Award, and the Crime Fest Specsavers Best Crime Debut Award, and was also shortlisted for Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year. So
it just takes too long to say all that, Nikki. It's not modesty.
And as you mentioned, You Can Run is your first standalone novel. It came out in paperback in September, and it's a fantastic thriller. It's set in the wilds of remote Northumberland, and it's a Will They Survive page turner that I absolutely adored. I will add that I listened to it on Audible, and the narrators were fabulous.
She's incredible, I think.
Yeah, really amazing.
There's a lot of voices, and she kind of nails them all, which is pretty impressive.
Very impressive. So could you start, Trevor, by telling us about You Can Run?
Yeah, it's as you say, it's set in a remote Northumberland village. A group of armed men lay siege to the village looking for a 15-year-old girl and her father. They think it's going to be an easy task, but they've reckoned without the elderly villagers who don't take kindly to incomers. As one of the villagers, Margaret, who's in her early 80s, says, we've fought off the Vikings, we've fought off the Romans, and we've fought off the Picts, and we can see these buggers off too. I've seen it described as the Thursday Murder Club meets Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, fantastic.
Which I particularly like. I mean, when I say I've seen it described, that was my description in the first place, but I do quite like it.
Yes, thanks for that, Trevor. It really is a great read. The pace is absolutely fantastic, and it's a book, as all your books are, with real heart. But what stood out for me was the setting, that tiny village where everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and you can't walk down the street without somebody seeing you. And then it kind of becomes closed off from the whole world. So could you tell us a bit about the village? Is it based on a real place, and what made it the perfect setting for you?
Yeah, it's not a very specific real place, so it's not a real village. I had a brilliant time trying to find a real village. I wandered all over Northumberland. Some of it during that period in a kind of semi-lockdown where all you could do was actually go for walks out in the country. So I did a lot of that and picked up a lot of useful stuff, but could never quite pin down the perfect place. I even hired a cottage up there after lockdown and spent about 4 days just heading off with a backpack to try and find exactly the place I wanted. But I found loads of places that were close, but nowhere that was quite right. I wanted a single road in and out of the village that could be blocked off easily. I didn't want too many houses. I didn't want it to be huge, and more of a hamlet, really.
Yeah,
but I don't describe it as a hamlet because a lot of people don't know what that means. So it's kind of redundant. So I couldn't quite find the right place. So it is fictionalized, but it's set in a very real area. I know exactly where it is. And there are lots of references to things that I've stumbled across as I was wandering around that kind of locate it in the right place. So I found some amazing things, like a place called Winter's Gibbet, which is the most bizarre tourist thing you've ever seen. It's a scaffold. It's basically where it's a memorial to where the last man was hung in Northumberland. So it's a scaffold with a rope on it, and you're like, what? I stumbled across it as I was just walking down a road. I thought, well, I must be seeing things here. That's bizarre. And by amazing coincidence, the father in my book was called Winter. That was his surname.
Oh, right.
And the guy they hung was called Winter, and that's why it's called Winter's Gibbet. And I thought, well, that's going in. And there were various other things I discovered. I didn't know what a blind was. I don't know if you've come across a blind before, but it's like, like a bird watcher's hide where they go in and look out to see birds. This is for deer hunters, so it's on legs. It's really high up. Wow. And I thought that's a perfect place for somebody to keep watch on a village to stop people getting out. So all those kinds of things make it feel like it's a real village, I think. Perfect. And my wife drew a beautiful map for me because I wanted to get it in my head. So she drew a great map, which I still got on my wall here. And I sent it to my publishers and said, I'd like a mapping because the village is important, And they said, oh yeah, great, we'll give it to our artist. So my wife's map didn't go in, and she's never really forgiven me for that. And it's identical, honestly. It's like the same thing.
Oh, they could have used it.
Yeah, shame.
Well, the novel is quite unusual in another way as well, in that it's told from the point of view of teenagers. There are some adults in it as well, and I will give a shout out to Margaret, who you just mentioned as one of my all-time favourite characters and a battle axe that I aspire to be one day. But 15-year-old Ruby and Lucas really are the central characters of the book. So I wondered, how did you go about writing teenage characters, as you're not quite a teenager anymore, Trevor?
What are you trying to say?
Well, and I just wondered as well, and when you talk about the teenagers, whether your editors or publishers ever sort of had it as an issue with the fact that it's an adult novel but has sort of teenagers in the central characters.
Yeah, funnily enough, they never did. Actually, it was more me. I was the one who was more concerned about that aspect, really. For two reasons. Yes, could I write from a teenage perspective? Because I am of a certain age, which is much higher than teenage. But also how you write from that perspective and don't write a YA novel. It took me a long time to kind of process the way to do that. I'd read a lot of books that I'd really enjoyed that had young narrators, but were clearly adult books, like Chris Whitaker's But We Begin at the End. I mean, again, he has a second narrator as well, but the prime narrator really is Duchess. Is that the right name? Yeah, I think so. And I read Gym Patrol on the Purple Line. I don't know if you've read that, by Deepa Anapara, which is terrific. Again, very young narrator, and various other books. So I knew it could be done, but I couldn't quite work out what it was that separated those books from YA books. So I basically just took a lot of advice for people. One of the writers in our debut 20 gang, Andrena Cordani, is a YA writer. So I sent a lot of my early stuff to her and asked her to have a look at it, and she was great. She gave me some great feedback. I think Nikki read an early version of the start of it, just to make sure that the voice was right. I used my daughter to bounce ideas off and have a look at it. So I ran it by a ton of people for the voice and to make sure I wasn't going down the YA route. And that's partially why there are all the other adult characters that are in there and get voices as well, because I think that takes it away from a YA novel. And it's partially, Andrena was saying, it's also partially about the level of danger and the kind of backstory that's going around it. And it's quite a serious backstory in this book that wouldn't really be reflected in a YA novel, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if all that made any sense at all.
No, it did. And in fact, I loved the multiple characters. And in fact, I think it probably was that book then that inspired me, because in my next thriller that's coming out in February, I've got 4 point of views and I've never written 4. I've normally only done 2. And I think that it was something about listening to all those different voices telling the same story that really inspired me. So thank you for
that. Absolute pleasure. But I think we all get ideas from reading other people's books. You know, there's always something where you think, yeah, I think I can use that. And it was pretty much my first multiple narrated book as well. I had a few voices in one of the Jimmy books, but they were quite small chunks, whereas in this one there's probably, I don't know, 4 narrators probably, and maybe even 5 if you count one of the armed guys who I gave a voice to as well. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it is interesting writing from more voices than you're used to, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think one of the things that you're really good at, Trevor, is coming up with unusual ideas. And so in your Jimmy Mullen series, obviously the amateur detective was a homeless ex-veteran. And then in this novel, you've come up with this kind of gripping action thriller that involves a paramilitary group laying siege to a small village. So I think that they're quite original ideas. And I just wondered, how important is it for you to come up with these kind of slightly, I guess, left of field, but very original book ideas? And do you think it's inevitable that your previous experience in the Navy always creeps into your stories?
I don't know about the latter. I hope not. I think the idea, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? You know, I wish I could write for the market a bit more and go, oh, I can see what's popular out there. I'll write one of those, but I just don't have that in me, frankly.
And also, I don't think anybody can. We've talked about
it.
No, I want to write the book I want to write, the kind of book I'd want to read. And I wouldn't enjoy doing it any other way. So it has to be something I really believe in, I think. So the Jimmy books fitted that kind of template, if you like, perfectly. I really wanted to write about the homeless and give people a different perspective on them. And with You Can Run, I wanted to write something completely different from the Jimmy books. I wanted to write a fast-paced thriller. And I did struggle for ideas on that, I must admit, but I just kept getting this idea about a young child seeing a parent who'd previously been quite quiet and respectable committing a really serious act of violence, and about the repercussions of that. And it started just from that idea. And I just kind of sat down and wrote the beginning without any thought that there would be armed men taking control of a village. I kind of envisaged it as a road movie originally. I thought the child of whatever age would see this act of violence and have to go on the run to escape the people who were going to try and get revenge on her father. And I thought that would work if they're just being chased all over the country, and it would be a really kind of, you know, like an action road movie. But it quickly became apparent to me that it was a lot more interesting if they couldn't get out of the village.
Yeah.
They were trapped there. It's more claustrophobic, which kind of brought the other characters into play almost straight away. But it also meant I needed a lot more of the villains to keep them captive in this village. So it kind of grew from the original idea that the armed men was almost an aside, really. So yeah, I don't think that was influenced by my military background, but obviously, you know, possibly it just creeps up on you.
I'm sure it
and one of the
in.
Characters, one of the villagers is ex-army, so that kind of crept in as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't really intentional on that one, and I think the future books I have planned hopefully have no military connotations. I've got to escape that shadow of the military.
I've always really enjoyed all the books, so I'm not sure about that. But We'll come back to your later books, your future books, I should say, in a minute. As we said at the start, a lot has changed for you in the last 2 or 3 years. So you've gone from being a debut in lockdown to writing a hugely popular crime series, and now you've moved on to a standalone with You Can Run. So can you tell us how you found the last few years, and what have been, in fact, the standout moments for you?
Well, it's been a blast. Obviously, it's been great. I know, you know, like any other job, there are occasional frustrations, and it can be really annoying when, you know, things aren't going quite as well as you would hope. But by and large, I've had an amazing kind of 3 or 4 years, really. Particularly, I think, because The Man on the Street came out to so little fanfare, and you know, I got a very small advance. There was no real publicity. So I wasn't, my expectations were fairly low, to be honest. But then just one thing after another seemed to happen. I got a really good quote from Lee Child to go on the cover. Val McDermott chose it for her New Blood panel at Harrogate, which sadly was a virtual panel because of lockdown again. And then, as Nikki said, you know, I won a Dagger for it. Then I won a Crime Fest, and then shortlisted for the Theakston's Crime Novel of the Year. So it just kept growing and growing and growing. So all of those things were fantastic, but I think mostly the highlights have basically been meeting other writers and getting so many points of support and so much help from so many people. Which has been a joy. I've got so many groups that I kind of lean on for help. I've already mentioned the Debut 20s, of which Nikki is part. I've got Northern Crime Syndicate. We do lots of events together and really look after each other. I've got a local writing group in Newcastle that I've been a part of for about 7, 8 years now, who still meet up every few weeks. And then there's my UEA gang as well, we still share work. So all of those things have been great. I love doing the festivals when I can. I've done pretty much all of them now. Many of them, you know, under my own steam. I've done Iceland Noir and Shetland Noir and Crime Cymru, which was great fun. And all the support in the Northeast has been amazing. I don't really want to be branded like a Northeast writer, because I think the books work wherever, but inevitably you need local support, and all the bookshop owners up here and managers have been fantastic, really fantastic. And we've got people like Vic Watson, who does Noir at the Bar, and Baytels.
Yes, oh, lovely Vic, who's about to have a baby.
who had my back from day one. She put my first
well, she
ever
has
panel
all our
on.
backs, I think, doesn't she? Regardless of where we live, she's amazing.
And we've also got Jackie Collins, who doesn't live up here anymore, but runs Newcastle Noir. So those two have you know, always supported me. So all of that kind of stuff has been just joyous. It's just a really great community to be a part of, I think.
And what would you say the key things that you've learnt about publishing in the few short years that since you've kind of come into it to 2020, so 3 years? What would you say the key things are that you've learnt?
Oh God. Thanks. I haven't changed my process at all. I've stuck to pretty much exactly the same process. I've never been a planner. I don't ever intend to be a planner. Which I'm actually currently teaching the Faber Academy course up in Newcastle. So I've had to plough through quite a few books about planning just so that I can tell them what I don't think they should bother listening to, but which is a weird situation.
You need Lauren or I in for one of those sessions, because we are avid planners with our Post-it notes.
So I kind of I understand the basics of planning, but I don't intend to follow any of them. So I've stuck to the same process. I do use a lot of early readers, like my local writing group sees pretty much everything I write. They almost never see the end of the book because we don't have enough time to do all that. So they've seen the first 2/3 of pretty much everything I've written. And I'd still use my UEA pals, Harriet and Kate, look at my stuff. So I do use other readers as I'm going along, and I edit as I'm going along, but that process has not changed on any of the books. So I don't see any reason to attempt to change it at the moment. As for what I've learned about publishing, I think primarily my main take on it is that you can do nothing about your sales. It doesn't matter what you do at all. All you can do is write the best book possible. It's up to your publishers to sell your book. And you should try very hard not to take responsibility for sales. I fight my corner quite firmly if it's suggested it's anything to do with me, because we know it's all about marketing. Sales is all about marketing. If you get a lot of marketing, you will sell a lot of books. If you don't, you won't. It's really that simple. And yes, you can build up a nice relationship with readers on social media. You can make a tiny difference, but it is a tiny difference. You'll never turn yourself into a bestseller without marketing support. So don't take responsibility for sales. It's the biggest thing I've learned about publishing for writers. Write the best book you possibly can and put it out there, and you've done your job then. I do think public appearances are useful. I do as many as I possibly can. Whether you sign or sell books is irrelevant to me. If you talk to an audience of 20, 30, 50, 10 people, whatever, a lot of those will go away and they'll remember you. They'll buy your books somewhere else. They'll download them online, whatever. So I do like public engagement, but primarily that's just because I enjoy it, not because I think it's going to, sell me hundreds of books.
That's brilliant advice. I really love that advice, and I couldn't agree more, actually. Since your process hasn't changed at all, I just wondered how that ties in with deadlines now, because when you didn't have a deadline and you were sending it out to people to read and feedback and edit, that obviously takes time because everyone's busy. But now you've got a deadline. How do you fit it all in, and how long does it take you to write a book?
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. I've not considered it too much, because the Man on the Street was developed on the UEA MA, and it was a 2-year course. So by definition, it kind of took me 2 years to write, because we were delivering certain amounts of words at certain points. So there was no point doing it any quicker, really. And we had other things to do as well. But the process was still the same. I was still writing as I went along. I was sharing the work with other people. It was just spread out over a longer period. I've found since then that, I like most traditionally published writers, I have to deliver a book a year. I know that with my process, I can write that book in about 7 to 8 months, give or take, and I edit as I go along all the time. So by the time I've got to the end, it's quite polished already. Although I do then obviously go through it countless times to make it even better and to change things around. But I know that if I reliably sit down 5 days a week, which I pretty much always do, and work from 9 till 5, I will produce enough words of enough quality to get that book done in 7 or 8 months. So I've never missed a deadline. In fact, I'm normally early and have to see if my editor is free to actually look at something. So it just seems to work for me, and my books always seem to come out at roughly the same number of words, give or take a couple of thousand, which, given that we're talking between kind of 95 and 100,000, that's quite amazing, really. And given that I don't plan, they always kind of seem to start to move towards the end at the right point.
See, you say you don't plan, and I do believe you, but I do have a theory that you pansters actually plan in an unconscious little compartment of your brain, and in there is all the spreadsheets and the posters that we put out on the wall. It's all in there. So you say you don't plan, but it's there somewhere.
I don't disagree with that entirely, Laurie. I think there is some truth in that, and I do think that some people are lucky enough, or maybe have read so many books that they've kind of absorbed the basic structure of a book, and they kind of have a rough idea in their head of at what point they should throw in a twist, or at what point they've reached the middle, and how they're going to get from there to the end.
That's
I think
so true.
For some lucky people, and I count myself among them, it seems to almost come naturally, which obviously makes your life a lot easier, I think. Yeah. And obviously at some point it could all go horribly wrong, and I'll have to retract that entirely.
No.
But I think that's true. And I do, as I'm going along, I do start, I start to imagine ways that it could possibly go and think, okay, maybe that's where this will go. But that doesn't really kick in until at least halfway through, and sometimes even later than that. And I do start to keep, like, I keep chapter lists. So as soon as I've started to write a few chapters, I start to keep a list, and I do keep an eye on things like how often a certain voice is coming back in, and so with You Can Run, where I had so many voices, I would see that, okay, I haven't used this voice for a while, maybe it's time for this guy to speak up. So if you call that planning, then I've got a bit of a structure going on. I'm not religious about that. It's not like, oh, I need this voice to come in every 5 chapters or anything like that. It's just, if they haven't been around for 10 chapters, I might start to think, okay, they probably need to say something here. So I do monitor what I'm doing, but I genuinely have no idea where the books are going. I had no idea what You Can Run was about until I was about halfway through it. I had no idea what the backstory was. Really. It just kind of started to appear.
And what do you think you've learned about yourself in the last few years? Because I think we'd all agree that publishing is quite a roller coaster journey.
Yeah. I think I've kind of learned to stay very balanced about the whole thing. I've always liked that Kipling quote about treating triumph and disaster, treating those two imposters the same. And I think I can do that. I don't get carried away by the success, and I don't get too worried by the apparent failures. I enjoy the good reviews. I ignore the bad reviews unless they're constructive, and that's fine. You can take something from that. So I stay on a fairly level plane the whole time, regardless of what's going on around me, because you can get distracted by the noise, or even the lack of noise can be distracting as well. But I just try and write the best books I can without taking all that into account, really.
And is that the advice that you'd give to someone who's a debut, do you think?
Yeah, probably. Well, I would, but I think it's just, if that's not your personality, then it's quite difficult to carry that off. It's quite difficult to ignore, particularly if you're not used to that kind of thing. To ignore getting bad reviews from people is quite difficult, I think. I wrote for the theatre for 10 years before I started doing this, so I'd had terrible reviews all over the place. So, and they're from journalists in newspapers that are going out to all kinds of people. So having somebody give you a bad review on Amazon is kind of small beer. I once had, it was in The Guardian, actually, one of the plays I co-wrote with my friend Ed. We had a review that said the writers set the bar really low, yet still managed to limbo dance under it. And that was in The Guardian. So once you've had that, you kind of go, I don't care if Brian from Atherstone says he didn't like my book very much. It's kind of small bit. So yes, I would, but I know that's quite hard. I think my main advice to debut writers would be to find other debut writers, to find as many writers as you can. Find your tribe, because you will need those people in so many different ways.
So true.
And it's incredibly valuable to have other people who are going through the same thing as you are to talk to. So that would be it. And also, not just debut writers, but go out to festivals, go and meet all the writers you possibly can, because everybody's incredibly helpful. And when you want that quote from whoever on your book, Mark Billingham, Vaz Khan, whoever, if you've actually met them at a festival and spoken to them, it's much easier for you or your editor or your agent to approach them and say, would you read this book? And if you like it, it would be great if you could say something about it. So get yourself out there. Don't sit all the time at your desk writing your book.
I think that's what I sort of say to a couple of my mentees sometimes, is don't wait for your book to come out to think that you then have the right to attend these festivals and talk as an author and be part of it, because you've written the book and it's coming, or even if it's out on sub, just you're still part of this community. Come and meet people, because it's just so important, isn't it, to make connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know loads of writers who are now published who have been going to festivals for quite a while, and have just got to know people, and then as soon as they're published, they've got a head start, really. So
exactly. Yes.
And even if you can't meet, even if you can't go kind of physically in person, then at least interact maybe on social media or online. because there's big
absolutely.
on that too.
Any contact you can have with the writing community is really useful to you.
Yeah, that's so true. Now moving back onto your books now, Trevor, I wondered if it was hard making the decision to say goodbye to Jimmy and the series. He was a popular character, and so I did wonder if there was pressure to continue the series. And is that it now for him? Have we said goodbye?
Yeah, of course it was hard. I mean, it's really lovely writing characters that you enjoy writing and that you love, and probably easier, if I tell the truth, to just continue to write the same characters, because you've kind of got a head start before you even start writing your book. You know what these people do, you know how they'll react. So there was that element, but I had always said from the start that I would only write 3 books. So it was originally intended to be a standalone. So I never planned it to be a series because of the nature of the books. It was about crimes in the homeless community. It was about a homeless guy with very few qualifications getting involved in solving these crimes in one way or another with the help of some of his friends. And I felt the strengths of the books were the realism of them, that these guys were written as genuinely homeless people, and to have them continuing to solve crimes for 10 years would have been frankly ridiculous. And I didn't want to like when a TV series goes on too long, and it kind of destroys the legacy of the stuff that you really liked before until you think the whole thing's terrible when actually some of it was great. I didn't want to get to that position. I didn't want to get to the position where people were going, it's getting a bit silly now. So I wanted to control it myself. So I always said it would be 3 books. And my publishers and Jane, my editor, were fantastic. I have to say, I kind of expected a bit of pushback after the 3rd one, particularly because I'm not a planner. I had given them no clue about the 4th book. I won't write a synopsis unless you pay me a huge amount of money, because I hate doing them. So they didn't have anything. My contract said to be decided, my 4th book. So I basically wrote the first 20,000 words of You Can Run and sent it off to my editor and said, this is what I want to write. And she very quickly came back and said, yeah, write that. That's great. I didn't get a single word about why not write another Jimmy book instead.
Good. That's brilliant.
Yeah, they were great. I was expecting something, but it never happened, which was lovely. As for Jimmy coming back, I mean, the last words in the 3rd book are never say never, I think, quite deliberately. I mean, it was a bit of a tease, really, but I thought it was fun to put it in there. And being realistic, if You Can Run and my next 2 books disappear without a trace and nobody buys them, then I might have to reconsider that position. I'm not entirely, self-defeating in that regard. But at the moment, I have no plans. Of course, there is a TV option out there. There is a script being written. It's kind of moved on a little bit, but you know what these things are like. It may never happen, but it's possible we will see Jimmy and his friends on the telly. And I guess this a small exclusive, I guess, for In Suspense, provided it stays the same, is that one of the characters will pop up in my next book, unless my editor removes them. I literally sent it off to them 2 days ago, so I have no idea. But it's kind of out there, and one of them is in there briefly.
Fantastic.
The book's set in Newcastle. There's something there that fitted one of the characters perfectly, and I thought, well, I've already got a character that knows all this stuff, so why would I not use them?
And is it a standalone? The next
no,
one,
it's the start of a new series.
How exciting! Oh, that is exciting! Congratulations!
Yeah, it's been a challenge, this one.
And that's coming out in 2024.
Not until July, which is a bit later. My books have normally been out earlier in the year, kind of February, March time. But because I was at the end of my contract for You Can Run, there was a bit of a delay while we sorted out the next contract, really, which obviously pushed the books back. So it doesn't come out until July, but I mean, they say they want a long series, so we'll see how that goes. I mean, I've only got a 2-book deal, so that's about as long as it's going to be to start with. Which is kind of interesting because I, you know, I'm not sure I want to plan to write a long series if I don't know if I'm going to get a deal for more books in the same series. It's quite tricky, really.
Yes, it is. And finally, we'd love to know what you're reading at the moment, Trevor, and if you've got anything you'd like to recommend to us.
I'm reading so many books. I've got, honestly, to my left here, you can't see, I've got one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got 8 books there, and they're just the ones that, like, I need to read immediately. I've got a box of about 50 behind me somewhere. I've had 2 people today ask me if I'd read something. I've just, for once, I've had to say, I really,
say no,
you know, it just can't happen between now and Christmas. And because I'm teaching this Faber course, I'm using like a suggested book every week just to illustrate points. And now and again, of course, I haven't read some of these for ages, and I've had to go back and kind of read those. So I'm so far behind. But I have read so many books in the last few weeks. So let me think. I'll give you a handful. I read this a little while ago, but it's not been long out. I absolutely loved Speak of the Devil, Rose Wilding's book.
Lots of people recommend that.
I thought it was fantastic, especially because that is a debut, and she manages, I can't remember, like about 8 characters and about 8 voices, which for a debut is incredible. Yeah, and it's set in Newcastle, so there was an obvious appeal to me, although she sadly lives in Manchester, which I'm sure she regrets now. But it's a great book. I loved Notes on an Execution.
Yes.
Daniel Kafka, I think, is the writer.
I loved that.
I mean, that's at the way at the literary end. It's wonderful, yeah. I thought it was beautifully written. And in the structure is really impressive, I think. And it's one of the few books I've written where one of the characters is written in second person, and I could actually read it. Normally kind of leaves me a bit cold, but I thought she did it beautifully. And I'll give a shout. I did an event with Kate Evans this week, which was great fun. We had a lovely time, and it meant that I've caught up on her 3-book series. The latest is No Justice, and it began with what's the first book called? Something Crows. Can't see it. Anyway, it's a 3-book series. No Justice is the third. Drowning Not Waving, or Waving Not Drowning is the second one. And it's got a wonderful lead character, a 50-something-year-old perimenopausal woman who's a probationary detective, and she's written with all the flaws and problems that you might expect from that, and it's a great character, and I've really enjoyed catching up on the series.
Fantastic, thank you for those recommendations. What about you, Nikki?
I have just been reading very early proof of Joe Callahan's new one.
How did you get that? Why haven't I got that?
Where did you get that from? Right, I'm calling her up.
Called, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say what the title is.
It's a sequel, isn't it? Sequel.
It's a sequel to In the Blink of an Eye, and all I will say is it is equally as good, if not better. I absolutely loved it. So yes, that's my latest, and otherwise I've been drowning in copy edits. So which have now gone back. Hurrah! So yes, hopefully I'll have a bit more time. How about you, Laurie? What have you been reading?
Well, based on your glowing recommendation, I have been reading Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. I can't remember when that's out. Do you know, Nikki? When's that coming out?
Is it March next year?
It's next year. But I have only read half of it because I have to keep stopping because it's really scary and terrifying. So I read it and then I'll read a few chapters. And I'm also reading, I've sort of stopped that now just for a moment, not because it's in any way its fault, but just because I'm off, someone asked me. I'm reading Her Last Summer by Emily Freud, which is so brilliant, and I can't wait to get back to it tonight. In fact, I've committed to going to bed early to read it tonight, and it is so
I really want to read that.
It's so fresh and plays so much on our desire and interest in unsolved murders and
Okay.
the hero and villains of sort of when you don't really know what's happened. So I've loved it. I can't wait to get back to that tonight and finish it off. So yeah,
I
they
think
are mine.
Kate Evans' first book is called Awake of Crows. Is that the collective noun for
Awake.
crows?
Yeah, it must be. Yes.
I thought it's a murder of crows, isn't it?
Oh no, yes, you're right.
so
It's a murder.
I don't know.
I think it's called Awake of Crows. Anyway, people can find it, I'm sure. But
yes, Kate Evans, everybody.
Kate Evans.
So I think, sadly, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much indeed, Trevor Wood, for joining us again. And just a reminder that you can get hold of You Can Run, which is out now in paperback, ebook and audio. And we would both highly recommend picking up a copy.
Yes,
Thank you.
we would.
It's been lovely to be back.
Thank you. Well, next week we're back with another agent mini-sode, so do tune into that. And then Nikki and I will be talking to thriller author Alex North about the importance of festivals, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes. So at the moment, it's goodbye from Trevor.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from Lauren.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Goodbye.